Good afternoon. In this webinar, we're going to learn how to create a multi-level game in Karel, and our theme is Earth Day. This is a way to learn how to use the Karel app, designer, and game editor to write thematic stories. I'm Sheila Crawford Bunch. I'm the Director of Education for NCLab. You can contact me anytime at sheila@nclab.com. And this webinar series is made possible by a Nevada State Library Archives and Public Records Continuing Education grant funded by the Institute for Museum and Library Services through the Library Services and Technology Act. Well, NCLab is a self-contained desktop platform where you can learn and use computer programming, modeling, and many other STEM skills. You learn the techniques through self-paced, self-graded courses, and then you can apply what you learn in the apps contained in Creative Suite. In this case, we'll be using the Karel app. In this webinar, we're going to learn how to engage people with storytelling. Every good game has a story behind it. We can also use storytelling for persuasion or to inform people about an issue or to teach a lesson. And we can do all three of those with our Earth Day theme. If you have your desktop account handy, feel free to open it and follow along. In the introduction, we'll talk a little bit more about our purpose, relate what we're doing to the computer science standards. Whether you're in a library setting or a school setting, these standards bring cohesion to your clubs or your classroom instruction, and they're used pretty much everywhere. They were updated in 2017 and serve as a pretty good guideline. We will go over storytelling elements in detail and specifically how it relates to gaming and discuss the Earth Day themes. On the technical side, we're going to learn how to use the designer mode thematically, how to use the game editor to write stories and import media, and how you can share the games as multi-level sets. At the end, we'll discuss how to plan an event. Our purpose specifically is to use the storytelling in games to convey the impact of technology, and in particular computing, on people and the environment. We're also going to collaborate, so not one person is going to be able to create all the levels, and that wouldn't be very interesting anyway. As you'll see, I made an attempt to give you a template, but you'll find that when you divide up this task among a group of people, the results will be a lot richer. You will also be writing HTML pages using a text editor. The text editor is very forgiving. You don't have to know much about coding, although it will allow you to see the source code so you can get an idea of what is going on behind the scenes. And we'll practice importing media as well. The important thing about any game design is you're going to have technical limits. It doesn't matter whether you're designing say a 3D game using Unity, or in our case, a simple game using the Karel app. You do have limitations, and so you do have to put those constraints on your wonderful imagination. Since we're going to just focus on the storytelling aspect in this webinar, here are some links to other webinars that we've developed, and that will give you more background on creating the coding games. Attached to this webinar is a slideshow. All the live links will be in the slideshow. At least some of the participants should be familiar with Karel before starting. They should be able to build a story within the limits of their experience and the limits of the game designer and editor. If you have young children in your event, consider partnering them with some older mentors so that the tasks are not overwhelming. So you get that nice pairing of a child's imagination and adult or older siblings' ability to follow directions and do some of the coding. You do need to know the basic commands and operations, at least section 1. Section 1 is just on manual operation, And it does help to have basic typing and computer interface skills. Most people have that these days. And understand the elements of writing. Of course, our expectations are going to be age appropriate. We won't expect a 6-year-old to write a story at the level of a college student. A little bit about the standards. K-12 schools use standards to anchor their curriculum. And since libraries often collaborate with schools or provide out-of-school time programs, it's good to know what's going on with the standards. You'll find that local computer standards these days are generally derived from two sets. One has been developed by the Computer Science Teachers Association, and the other has been developed by the International Society for Technology and Education. Here's a look at the standards we're going to use to anchor our game discussion, and these are CSTA standards from 2017. I've put the link at the bottom if you want to dig a little further. You'll notice that the standards are divided into age blocks or grade blocks. Basically, with all these grade bands, as you go up, the discussion gets deeper and you're required to produce more evidence, and you may also be coming up with solutions. The ISTE standards we're going to focus on are two: creative communicator, where we're expressing ourselves through media, and the global collaborator. We're using digital tools to broaden our perspectives, and we'll be working in teams to create a set of games. If you'd like to take a look at the standards, I've put the link at the bottom. So this is the one particular standard we're focusing on. Use storytelling in games to convey the impact of technology on people and the environment. Keep in mind that impact can be positive, negative, or neutral. It's not all bad, it's not all good, and sometimes it really doesn't make a big difference. I would introduce this theme and the Earth Day theme early in the workshop. It just helps people develop ideas. And don't be surprised if you completely revise thinking as you go. Usually people start out with a scope that's too ambitious or broad. It might not work with the available design elements, and typically a story works better when it's more focused. All right, so here we're getting a little bit more into story writing itself. Try and have the player or reader experience the problems through the story. So rather than telling them what to do, immerse them in the actions of the characters. Storytelling is really quite powerful. Parables and fables have held up well over the millennia. We tell the same old stories over and over again because we remember them. We can see them happening in our head, whether it's a fox saying the grapes are sour or one of the biblical parables. We do remember the lessons learned from those stories. The Earth Day website has a lot of great themes that you can use. The theme for 2019 is Protect Our Species. They have a different theme every year, but they keep information on all the themes on their website. They have links to resources and packets for Earth Day events. So here again, our theme this year is Protect Our Species, and you can see a bunch of bees pollinating. And there's a quote from Rachel Carson. There's a library of resources that you can use. Toolkits, all kinds of stuff. This is very helpful for putting together your Earth Day celebration. And here's a profile on bees. And it's a pretty nice synopsis of what are the main problems going on with bees right now and how much we rely on them for our food. And there's some actions you can take to help protect the bees. So this is all stuff you can work on around the game. Well, let's go over story elements with a twist. We're going to think about them in terms of games. As many of your library patrons will know, games, online games and video games have well-defined roles and sequences. And we're also going to look at it in terms of robotics and programming. So this is more of a real-world context. It helps us think about solutions for the future too, and some of the obstacles we might have to overcome getting there. We'll look at genre, character development, setting, plot, problem and solution, big ideas, big lessons and themes, and I've included some useful Wikipedia links as a starting point. Of course, libraries have excellent research databases, and this will be an opportunity to introduce at least your older patrons to those databases that go way beyond what we can dig up on our cell phones. Genre. Well, there's just tons of possibilities. I was surprised how deep the list went on Wikipedia, but let's just look at three for now. We can take a realistic approach, something that could happen in real life. We can go complete fantasy, even personify Karel as a character. And we can take a look ahead, maybe do some, think about what robots might be as advanced robots or even humanoid robots. We can take a dark view, a dystopian or apocalyptic, or we could take an optimistic view. We could look at how technology is going to completely change what our life is going to be like in, say, 50 years. Think about point of view. If you are Karel, first person, your view is from the ground. Remember when we're playing the game, we have the bird's eye view, but a robot is only going to see what's in front of it or underneath it, and will only have logical responses. So that could be an interesting way to develop a game. You could also simply be the person who is the operator issuing commands and reviewing responses. So that's another point of view you could use. And you can also be third person or even omniscient, where you're reporting on what's going on and you have the bird's eye view. Remember again, we're looking at what we can do, but we're also looking at what we can't do. So both capabilities and limitations can add a realistic flavor to a story. Karel itself, or programming in general, has traits. You can have deterministic traits where everything is a fixed routine. You always respond in the same way. Some of us do that when we get up in the morning. Or you can have stochastic or conditional responses. You respond to conditions as they come up. You may select from a variety of responses, and this actually leads to artificial intelligence and machine learning, where the program is starting to teach itself based on the data that it encounters and how its responses change the outcomes. So this is what AI is all about. Again, our traits are limited by our sensors, and in Karel's case, we only have one below and one in front, very basic. But of course, as humans in the stories, we are very sensory, and we can bring that flavor to how we interact with the story and with the environment. All right, so we can also develop our characters in robots versus humans. So robots' advantages: very good at repetitive tasks, precise tasks, heavy loads, which is very nice for us. Those of us who used to have to use our back a lot, some of that's being automated. Robots are used in hazardous conditions. They can be available 24 hours. They can have huge data storage and analytic capabilities. Very narrow but large. Human advantages. Well, we have wonderful lateral, flexible, and holistic thinking capabilities, and these improve how we assess impacts on culture, human needs, and emotions. And we're not limited by our programming. Of course, that could be a debated question as well. Watch for gender. Robots are gender neutral, but we have a habit of referring to them as male. And this is also a whole interesting subject area, looking for bias in design and performance, traits, and application. This is just a note on video game stats. Most video or online characters are designed around a complex and measurable set of characteristics known as stats. From the user perspective, these are usually a mix of fantastic powers and also realistic traits. And if you want to look up a little bit more on stats and role-playing games, I provided another Wikipedia link. Now, unfortunately, Karel again is very simple. We can't assign stats to Karel, but we can always build them into the storyline. I bring up stats partly because some of your patrons may go on to being game designers, and they'll be working extensively with game stats. So it's an interesting area to research. Another characteristic of video games are the dungeon rolls, and a lot of people play these type of games. There's typically three types of roles: tank, damage, and healer. And then there's a lot of outside the dungeon supporting functions. And really, these roles, they're used in playing a game, but they have many real world analogs. So if you look at a tank is typically heavily armored, and it's maintaining the focus. In game terms, that's called aggro. So if you're fighting a big boss, for example, the tank is going to make sure the boss is trying to attack it and not the other players. Interestingly, this sometimes happens to heads of states. They act as tanks. A lot of the work is going on behind the scenes, but they take all the flack and they pull all the focus. Damage players are typically working very hard at bringing down the opponent and controlling crowds, and also avoiding focus because they're a lot weaker. They don't have the same kind of armor. Healers are busy mostly keeping the tank alive because as long as the tank is alive, then the tank can keep the boss focused on them. And typically the other damage players can do some moves to heal themselves, although every now and then the healer has to step in and heal them as well. Another fun aspect of gaming are the vehicles, or sometimes people call them mech suits. So players assume the control of a robot or a weapon or a vehicle with abilities far beyond their own. You also in games have a supply chain, so you're creating potions or building devices that you need in order to solve the problem or defeat the boss. And you also typically have managers in online games or offline games such as Dungeons and Dragons. They're going to make some decisions and allocate roles and also allocate the rewards. So these are all game elements. Again, it's fun to build them into your game. You don't have to. It's good to be aware of them, and certainly if people go on to designing games, they should be aware that these are very common roles. Okay, personality. Well, we're kind of obsessed with our personalities and have always been so, and you can see that whether you're referring to spirit animals or astrological charts, all the way up to Myers-Briggs tests. Um, there's lots you can learn about personalities and the psychology behind our actions and debates on how we got to be who we are, a mixture of nature and nurture. So these are all research possibilities that can stem from developing a story. Another key aspect of character development is motivation. And this is a good question. Can we program motivation? And on the other side of it, how do automated systems affect human motivation? Again, here's another Wikipedia link. And if you want to learn more about the different types of motivation, it certainly goes beyond just Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's lots of complex thinking behind motivation. We can also drill it down to survival or success. And what does that mean in terms of a task for a robot or a program? And what does it mean for us as humans, as the game player, as a programmer, as a person in this incredibly fast changing world adapting to automation and digitalization and how we apply the technology? Lots of questions there. What's going to happen through the game? How is the character going to grow? In our course, we tried to bring that aspect of growth into the story. Karel, quote unquote, develops intelligence and capabilities. And if you want to learn a little bit more about machine learning, again, here's another link. Part of our objective is to teach people how computers and robotics create and solve problems. In the game I'm going to show you, the focus is a little bit more on what we've done to the land, both in farming techniques and basically just how we use land in general. It's beyond just computer technology, but we hope to teach is how we can use computer and robotics technology to solve some of the problems we've already created and to try and avoid creating new problems. When you're talking about setting, the best stories typically are when people write about what they know. Not always the case. Some people just have fabulous imaginations and can imagine rich, elaborate stories without ever having been to a place. But for most people, that means their local environment and their own time span. Within the game itself, you can compress and stretch time intervals so you can have dramatic split-second problem solving. You can alternate short and long spans of time, even jumping ahead millennia. Here's a visual story frame for a plot. And again, this is really based on gaming story frames, but it's not that much different than a classic story development up to a climax and then a resolution. Typically in a game will have a breadcrumb to send you to a location. The breadcrumb will give you the setting and the initial problems. Then you might have several games which include object collection or avoiding obstacles. And for Karel, Karel can collect data as well. So these are three things that Karel can do. There'll be a climax, it could be a boss level or some combined or complex tasks or just a critical event in the story. We'll then move to solving levels. So maybe we're filling containers or something like that. It's just something Karel can do. And just wrap up with a conclusion. So this is a story structure that can be used to develop the game. Keep it simple. This is just a text version of what you just looked at. We're going to lead them to the quest, introduce what's going on, do some of these skills within the story building levels and the climax, and apply solutions, and then conclude the chain and offer a new breadcrumb. In our case, we're also hoping to lead people into thinking about the environment since this is Earth Day. So keep in mind that Karel is just capable of logic and coding. They're puzzles. Each level is going to solve a small problem, and they should reasonably tie to a problem associated with the whole game. They're going to be limited by those that can be solved by the mechanics and design elements of the Karel game app. So, for example, you can't have Karel throwing an object at a target because it's not built into the Karel mechanics. Karel can pick up objects and place them in containers. Another example is we can't do a story about sea turtles because there are no sea turtle objects at the moment. But you could, for instance, create a task that involved counting and collecting plastic bottles on the beach because there are bottle objects and there are beach scenes. Let's relate big ideas, lessons, and themes together. A big idea, really, it's something you can express in one or two words. So, for example, a big idea might be pollution. Then the theme is a sentence on how the big idea affects characters or events in the story. So here's an example. Sea animals are affected by plastic that floats up floats on the ocean and is washed up on the shores. And we're going to include some lessons, hopefully some behavior change. What can you do about it? As far as the plastic is concerned, we can emphasize reducing our use, reusing it, and hopefully recycling it, making new plastic products out of it. And an example of that as a sentence would be, you can reduce your use of plastic bottles by drinking water from a glass. So not use them at all would be one behavior change we could make. Okay, back to our story frame. So here's our sample Earth Day game. And it relates to the protect our species themes, in particular bees. Since we have pumpkins as objects and a farm theme, we're going to take advantage of those. So Carol's going to investigate a pumpkin farm in distress. Carol's going to be sent to harvest a field of pumpkins. When Carol gets there, it's going to find very few pumpkins. It's going to find pesticide and dead hives, and it's going to do some data collection. It's going to map a spill area. Sophia, and if you remember from the course, Sophia is the maker who builds Karel and programs Karel. So Sophia is going to raise awareness by showing a movie about the bees and selling popcorn and candy handed out by Karel. And once they have enough money, then they can rebuild the farm, clean it up. Carol's going to plant some flowers to attract pollinators and revive the field. And then the plan is for Karel to expand with drone surveys of the surrounding farms. As you'll see, by the time I finished building the sample story, it departed from this original plan, and you should expect the same when you go to build your own games. The limitations sometimes dictate the story, and just new ideas come in as well. So, do you design the maze or write the story first? Well, if you design all the mazes first, you're definitely going to be able to keep the story within the limits of the mechanics and the design elements. If you write the story first, I think it helps you focus on the big ideas and lessons and make sure that the game doesn't deviate from them. Um, uh, Probably in real life, you're going to brainstorm both. You're going to go back and forth. You might not get into the task in too much detail just yet. Visit the designer and editor, research the themes, then do some rough storyboarding and start building after that. That's more of the writing process. Make sure you check availability of objects in Designer. The match doesn't have to be perfect, but it should make sense. And I put up some images of the objects that are currently available as far as themes, obstacles. So that includes both walls and obstacles you can just place that Karel will crash into if Karel walks over them. And these are the obstacles are detected by the front sensor, and that's kind of important when you're designing the game, as you will see. The objects are all collectible, and there's quite a range of them. They can include quote unquote good and also quote unquote bad objects. Karel will detect them underneath and be able to pick them up. Containers are marks that you can place objects, and you can even make them invisible. The target is actually invisible. The mark shows, but it's fairly subtle. Notice also you can put more than one object in the container, and you can specify which object type. Same thing, you can put more than one of each object on a square. So here's a little bit of a storyboard on the theme elements we're going to use in the game. We're going to use the farm themes and the garden themes. And I've picked a wall, a crate, and a skull. The skull is going to represent the dead hives. The objects are pumpkins. This is what we're farming, and of course this one looks like a jack-o'-lantern. I've got a tulip here, and I'm going to use some roses too to mix it up a little bit. The barrel is going to represent some chemicals, and the oil is going to represent some spills that we can clean up. The orange Popcorn and candy are items that are going to be handed out at the fundraiser. And then we've got some marks and bins to put things in. So level one, we're going to have Carol walking through the farm. And it's a good idea to make your first level just manual mode so that people get used to navigating obstacles and getting to the home square. It's a familiarization level without any coding. It's just manual, so it's just arrows and keys to pick things up or place them. In this case, the skull will stop you, so will the fence. And so it might take someone a try or two to get to the home square. In our second level of the game, Carol's going to collect some pumpkins for Sophia to analyze. He's already discovered the place is a bit of a mess, and we want to see how it's affected the pumpkins. We can use a very simple code, repeat 10, go if pumpkin get. So this is a simple programming level. Make sure you build the maze so that's easy to figure out and solve. And of course, it can still be solved in manual mode if you prefer to stay with manual mode. In the third level, Carol's going to count the spills and write a report. And you can build levels in these games by looking at different levels in the course and cut and paste the code from a course level. In this case, this was from 14.2 in the Karel course. So definitely you don't have to work too hard on the code end when you're designing the game. You might make your players work, but you can certainly use the resources at hand to build your game. And so here we have Karel, and the spills are in a straight line, but you'll notice that we have set a counter, and if Karel detects oil, Karel's going to pick it up, but Karel will also increment the counter and print a report, print statement, spills found at the end. So the next step for Karel is to clean up these barrels and avoid the dead hives. And again, it can be done in manual mode or programming mode. This level is taken from level 7.9 in the course. It uses if-else statements because Karel cannot run into those skulls, but Karel must collect the barrels. Okay, here's our turning point, and we're not fighting a boss or anything, but really they've determined it's going to take a lot more money than they have to restore the habitat. And they're not going to have a decent pumpkin crop unless the bees are healthy. All crops like that need pollinators, but they're going to try and really restore the environment for the farm because as you'll see there's also fruit trees on the farm, so it's not just the pumpkins, and generally speaking they're out to save the bees. So Sophia's going to hold a fundraiser and show a slideshow about the bees and sell popcorn and candy and oranges to raise money for the farm. This is taken from level 12.2 in the course. It's exactly the same maze. And of course, when you're placing things, make sure that you fill Karel's bag. In this case, it's been filled with oranges and candy and popcorn, and you do that in the Maze Designer. Here's the program, and that's straight from 12.2. All right, so now we've raised the money, and now Karel's restoring the farm. And so we're going to plant some flowers around the new hives, and then you can see a whole bunch of nice crates that represent the hives. We're not going to do anything with them, but the nice thing about the game designer is you can decorate your maze with anything, whether you interact with it or not. In this case, we're interacting with the marks, and that's where Karel's going to plant the flowers. And this program is based on a recursion similar to the one in level 23.7. It's pretty neat how it works. You'll get a copy of all these games. In the game, I've showed you how to set up what we call initial code. So a lot of the program is already written, and the game player can just simply fill in the blanks. It'll make it a lot less difficult. All right, so this is our last level. It's our conclusion, and they've had an excellent crop as a result of all the work they've done restoring the farm. Karel's going to record this particular field. This is one of those game limitations I was talking about. Karel cannot count the pumpkins in front because Karel can only detect a pumpkin underneath. So I've placed a fence around the pumpkins, and this is what Karel's going to use to count the block. It's a little bit contrived, but again, that's a game limitation. This code is taken from level 15.7. Similarly to the previous level, you can always do an initial code template for your game players where they're just filling in some of the commands and they get the sense of how this works. This is a nice teaching piece because it's exactly how you teach multiplication as an array where you count along one edge and then multiply it by the number of rows. So in this case, Karel's counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then turns and counts each row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and multiplies the two together to get 30 pumpkins. So it's a nice tie-in with learning multiplication as an array. This is from one of our previous webinars, and I won't go through it too much detail because that you really have to walk through this slowly on your own while you have your desktop open so you can see what we're referring to. Once you've created a game, you're going to have an edit menu, and there it is at the top. And you'll create pages. This is what builds your story. And you do that simply by pressing this plus button, and then you can move your pages around with the arrows. Once you've written your story, you save it. Make sure you do that before you exit or all your hard work is gone. And that's basically it for writing the stories. You can select your font size. It's just like any other text editor. On the Goals tab, this is where you're going to show whether you intend the user to play it manual mode or programming. And you can select some goals. You have to have at least one goal. Well, actually you don't, but it'll come up with a suggestion that you need one goal. There are ways to design a game with none of these goals specified. This is a fun box over here, the victory message. You can write anything in there. You can make it part of your story. And again, don't forget to save. So once you're into this process, you're going to design the basics, play it. You're going to find some stuff you like or don't like, go back and revise, play it again until you have a game that you feel is satisfactory. Once you have saved the game in your file menu, it'll auto save from there on. So it'll save all your changes for you. The story goes in this box, or we can also select full page to make it a tutorial page before the game level. Any conditions you've set will be in here, and then you'll either have a code cell where you can type your code with the controls at the bottom, or manual mode where you can just move Karel along. Your victory message will show after you've successfully played the game, and it'll show the data that's been generated from you playing the game. Sharing and publishing the game. You can not publish it, just keep it on your own account. You can make it so people can view it. Much more fun is that they can view it and run it. If you're going to collaborate with someone, you can assign the privilege to edit as well. Be careful with that. Make sure you really want them to be able to edit it. Game URLs are viewable in the desktop. The person viewing the file must have an NCLab account, but that's easy enough to create on the website homepage. The links are nice. You can share them in a document. I'll show you how to do that. You can email it to someone or message it to someone, and they can play the game from there. Okay, programming mode. You can assign points if you want. You can assign objectives. You can put in the words that are required, or if you have a certain type of game, you might want to forbid some words. For example, if you were doing a game where you're going to force recursion, you might want to forbid the word while. You can store your solution under the Solution tab, and I really recommend this. Once you've figured out how to solve your game, copy and paste the code from the game window into Solution. Don't forget to save. And then you can use the solution to build an initial code and a code template, just like we have in our course. So if you're going to do initial code, remember this is what the player will see when they open the game. So you always want it visible. It can't be erased, which is nice. So if they mess up, it'll go back to that initial code. And this is where you put it in the game editor. You can also build a code template, so this gives more of the structure. And again, it's just like what we do in when we build the course, and you save it under the code template tab. When you're writing your text pages, remember you can move them about, you can order them, and you can even copy your English version under a Spanish tab and translate it so you can have a bilingual game. Depending on what the user selects from their menu, they'll see one or the other. If you want to try and build on the templates I provided, you will be uploading those files to your own My Files. You can load a file from a disk, for instance, your hard drive or a thumb drive, or you can load it from a URL. You select the file, load the file, and when the green check mark appears, the file is successfully loaded. If you're going to use images in the game, you have a different link to use. Don't use this public link at the top. You're going to create a URL from the second box here and copy the link to a clipboard, and then that can be placed in your text editor. I'll show you that here. So when you're in your text editor, this is a picture I wanted to put in of a bee. You're going to click on this icon here, and that's where you put in your URL and make sure you save it, and the image will be in the game. All right, so here's a sample story. This is the introductory page or the breadcrumb. And Sophia is working away and she gets a phone call from her brother who says that he visited the farm and it's a disaster. There's dead hives everywhere, some kind of chemical spill. And Sophia says she can't get there right away, but she's going to ship Karel out to him, and Karel's going to be her eyes and her ears. That was our first page, and that would be over here. That's your first HTML page, and now we have a second HTML page. And make sure if you have a story page that goes before the game, you click this full screen button. You can use tables to divide up your screen. This one has the bee image on one side and the story on the other. And here's the game itself. So this is what's known as summary in the editor. And it has some text. This time the screen is split between the maze and the text, and there'll be a place if it's a programming game for a code cell. Once Karel's finished and has successfully completed the game, we'll get the message, and again, this can be part of our story. The farm is indeed a disaster. Thanks for the video, Karel. So we didn't actually end up harvesting the field of pumpkins. What we ended up was taking a video and sending it back to Sophia. I left this screen here because that was our original idea, but as I built the game, my ideas changed, and you'll find this happens too. As far as sharing the game files, right now users can't string together a set of levels into one multi-level game, but you can share the URLs in a table. I'll show you how to do that. I happen to use Google Form and Spreadsheet. There's other ways you can create a form. This one just happened to be handy for me, handy for a lot of people. And here's a form that we used at a library training. We keep it simple. What I found is best to have a place for the author's name, the title of the game, and the URL link. They can just cut and paste it right here. In settings, you'll find a place for send form. Here's a link that you can give your participants to post their responses. You're going to collect the responses with a spreadsheet. There's the spreadsheet icon, and it'll just automatically populate that spreadsheet. So here's a spreadsheet that we created when we were doing the Karel training. And you can see there's a bunch of titles. I just whited out the names. This is the date that they were put in, and there are all the URLs. So now you could share this spreadsheet with anyone, and they can click on one of those links and play the game. Back to our sample story. So I did create a file that you can share, and it has all the URLs for this particular Earth Day example. And make sure that if they want to modify the game, they can load it from the URL into their My Files, open the game, and then from the file menu in the Karel app, save as a different file name, and then they can use the game as a template to create their own variations. So this is what the spreadsheet looks like. And you can see there's some instructions here and a link to each of these games. Sample schedule. You could do this in one day or split it into several sessions. Several sessions are nice because you have a chance to think between each one. And I would suggest about an hour per session. And for the actual creation, give them a little bit longer. Again, split this creation among several teams in order to get the games done. And it's quite doable in a couple of hours. So the first session, you want to acclimatize your participants. Make sure they're all registered, that they have their NCLab accounts. And really, it's just fun to explore the app features. They can even be playing it from the website itself while they're waiting to be registered. These are projects from 3D modeling and from the Turtle course. And these are all playable. And here are some games that other people have created. And you can just open these up and play them. So this is a great way to get acclimatized to the game app. The second session, you might want to switch gears and do some research on the Earth Day theme itself. So they start building the idea side. They have a little feeling of the mechanics here, and now they can build their ideas. And session 3, you can always run them through some of the slides from this presentation on how to build a story. Or if you're comfortable, you can just present it directly. Set up your work groups. The fourth session is where they're actually working on the game level creation. And the fifth session is when they would share their games. And again, you can collect them on a form and share a spreadsheet, which makes it easy for everyone to play each other's games. In this webinar, we learned about the purpose of storytelling in games, a little about the computer science standards you can link storytelling to, something about the Earth Day themes. We learned how to use the designer mode thematically, how to use the game editor, and how to share the games as multi-level sets, and finally just some advice on planning the event. I'm going to just show you briefly what these games look like. So I'm going to go to my files, and I made a folder for those games called Bees. And there's the image I used in one of the levels. Here's the first game. I'm going to put it in play mode. And this is the beginning of the story. There's the page with the picture. And here's the first game in manual mode. And that's all playable. The second game is our first programming game. And Sophia's reviewed the videos and realized it really is a big mess. But they need some evidence. They need to show how the pollution and the chemicals have affected the bees. It's killed the hives. It's reduced the pumpkin crop, but it's probably also affected the quality of the pumpkins. So Carol's just going to pick up some pumpkins, and they're going to get delivered to Sophia for analysis. But we can also add some other story elements in there that are environmentally themed. For example, that we've introduced snakes here. These help keep the gophers under control. I know I had an argument with a neighbor once where they like to use a strychnine, and I wasn't very happy about it because it killed my nice gopher snakes that took care of my gophers for me. There's the third level, and if we play this level, and there's the solution. Okay, so I'm just going to paste that in there. You can see how it works. So I'll run it. Carol's cleaning up the oil spill so they can get the equipment in there. And got the oil, and Carol needs a trip to the Robo Wash. Fourth game. All right, and so every level the code gets a little more tricky too, and we've got some restrictions here. We're going to use these words. These are now required keywords, and I'm going to play the game. And again, I'm going to do my teacher cheat here. I'm going to put the solution in. And run the game. You see Carol avoiding all the dead hives and collecting all the chemicals. And then the fifth level is the fundraiser. And again, feel free to decorate your mazes with some of these elements. They don't necessarily have to be used as part of the game. And this is again based on the course. And this time I put in some initial code because the coding is getting a little more difficult. So that's what the initial code looks like. And let's just go ahead and run the solution so you can see how it works. There's all the healthy people down there eating oranges. And there's all the not so healthy people eating candy. And there's all the middle of the road people eating popcorn. And oh, fabulous. They must have sold a lot of popcorn because they raised enough money to finish their work. So now Carol is able to start restoring the farm. You can see there's some nice new hives, and we have all kinds of healthy wildlife as part of our ecosystem. We don't have nice bee icons, but there's some spiders for you. There's the fruit trees. So we're expanding our operation a little bit. And again, this has got some initial code in there because it's fairly difficult. I'm just going to go ahead and throw the solution in there. And we're going to run the maze. And this is a recursion, so it's really fun to see how this works. And Carol's done. Doesn't have to go home. Once he's met the objective, we're good. And then finally, we've got a great crop to harvest, but we're also trying to get people to think about this. So Sophia's having a conversation with her brother. It brings the story to a close, and she's asking some questions. How do we make a living, feed everyone, and keep the planet healthy? And this is just a little nod to the libraries. She's doing some research and she finds out there's an organic farming club at the library and they meet every second Thursday. And she almost forgot the libraries have access to massive research databases too. So they're setting themselves up for the next stage. And there's Carol counting all the pumpkins. Again, this was a mechanics issue. I had to put a little fence in there to give them something to count. So we'll play the game. And again, there's a template because it's pretty extensive code. I'm going to pop in my solution and run the game. There's Carol counting one edge, counting all the rows and multiplying, and at the very end, producing the report. I counted 30 pumpkins, and that's the end of the story. If you do this at your library, feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to help with any questions. And remember that this webinar, the slideshow, other materials, they're all available on the community page. You can access it with your instructor credentials. These are the ways to contact us. There are webinars on basic game creation, advanced game creation, Karel competitions, and much more. Well, happy Earth Day, happy coding, and I wish you all the great success in your event, and we'll see you in the next webinar.